Hello, my name is Andy Londo. I'm a professor in the forestry department at Mississippi State University, and I'm here to talk to you all today about site preparation. And this is Chapter 2 in the Managing the Family Forests in Mississippi publication. And this publication is available at msucares.com/forestry. So what we'll be discussing today is site preparation. What is it? Why do we do it? When do we do it? And how do we do it? Okay. And there's many things we actually do site preparation for, but I'm going to be talking about it from more or less from a production forestry standpoint. Some of the things we talk about will be applicable if you are interested in improving wildlife habitat or in doing other things. However, again, my perspective here on this will be from, again, more of a production forestry standpoint. So from that, it is site preparation as treatments that are applied to soil, or ground story vegetation to increase early survival and longer-term productivity of desired species by reducing the impact of site-limiting factors. The whole reason we do site preparation is really to reduce these impacts of the site-limiting factors, which we'll go over in the next few slides. Okay. What are they? The first one I'm going to talk about is drainage. And poor drainage can significantly reduce site quality on any given site. If you're interested in growing trees for timber, most trees prefer to grow in well aerated or better aerated soils. You know, the roots need air in order to take in water and nutrients and other things. If they're saturated or in conditions like we see here in this picture, it's going to be hard to grow anything of any real commercial value. To improve the drainage or alter the drainage, the only thing you can really do is some different mechanical site preparation techniques to either raise the water or lower the water table or raise the planting site. Herbicides and prescribed burning, which we'll also discuss here today, are not effective at all in altering the drainage. And you need to be careful when working, especially in wetlands, not to drain them. Draining of wetlands used to be the goal of many mechanical site preparation operations, in particular bedding here in the United States, in Canada, and in Scandinavia. But current regulations, U.S. regulations, prohibit the drainage of wetlands without a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. And this is because of something President George Bush said in 1991 when he said there will be no net loss of wetlands. And the EPA and the Corps of Engineers have taken that very seriously. So you start messing around in wetlands and altering drainage, you can get the US EPA on you, you can get the Army Corps of Engineers on you if it's a navigable waterway you're altering, or whatever the state water quality agency is. In Mississippi, that's the State Department of Environmental Quality. So be very careful when working in wetlands, and if you're doing site preparation activities, do not drain the wetland. Competition control. This is the most common limiting factor in the United States, is competing vegetation. Competition from other plants will reduce the initial survival and certainly the longer-term productivity and growth rates of your planted trees. And the herbaceous weeds ranked in importance, starting first with grasses, going to broadleaf herbaceous weeds, to vines, and then to woody plants. Grasses in particular are bad. If you've ever tried to pull up sod before, you know how thick a mat of roots and soil that grass produces. In terms of capturing especially water, grasses are very effective, and it's hard for tree seedlings to compete with those grass roots for water. The most effective control for competition is through the use of herbicides. Prescribed burning, certainly here in the southeast, isn't going to do you much good, and neither will mechanical methods. If you're in other parts of the country or possibly in other parts of the world, say in the upper lake states, mechanical site preparation may work just fine for controlling competition as well as drainage. But here in the southeast, if you're going to control competition, it's going to be herbicides. Soil compaction is just a measure of how dense the soil is or how close together the soil particles are. Soil can be compacted naturally by the presence of fragipans or hard pans, as we see here in this picture. It can also be compacted from agricultural operations, running a plow over a site, year after year after year, and the plow's at about the same depth. You can create what's called a plow pan at anywhere from 12 to 18 inches down. Mechanical site preparation methods are the only effective way to alter soil compaction. Another reason we do, or another limiting factor, is to facilitate planting or natural regeneration. There could be debris left on site following harvesting, which can reduce the effectiveness of planting, or if you're going to naturally regenerate, which is using seed from the trees. Excuse me. Having that debris on site can certainly be a hindrance to getting the regeneration established. If the debris is cleared, it's certainly easier to plant either by hand or mechanically. So in summary, we have our site limiting factors here on the left, which is drainage or aeration, depending how you look at it, and soil compaction. And the only real solution to that is mechanical means. Prescribed burning and herbicides do nothing to change soil conditions in that regard. Debris removal for planting or natural regeneration, it can be done mechanically, which we'll talk about those mechanical methods, or it can be done using prescribed burning, which we'll also talk about that coming up soon. If competition is your limiting factor, your single best option is to use herbicides. All right, next up we have the types of site preparation, and there are 3 types that I've already addressed in the introduction to this presentation. There are mechanical methods, chemical methods, and then prescribed burning or fire. And among the more commonly used mechanical methods, there's bedding, ripping or subsoiling, shearing, raking, and windrowing, disking, roller chopping, and crushing. And like I said, we'll go over these. Bedding is the mounding up of low ridges or beds, if you will, typically on flat, poorly drained soils. It's being used more in upland areas here in the southeast. I'm not exactly sure why some of our timber companies have been doing this, other than it creates easily recognizable planting sites. You look down a row and by goodness you can see where they want you to plant. Okay? But it's pretty expensive to run a piece of equipment over a site like that. We're talking anywhere from $100 an acre up to $200 or $300 an acre, depending on how many passes you're making. If you can combine some of these activities into one pass, that certainly would reduces the cost. For example, a 3-in-1 plow, which I'll show you in a couple minutes, will cost about $150 per acre to do 3 passes. Versus if you did each individual pass, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 total, which is an awful lot of money to spend per acre on site preparation, and it's hard to financially and economically to justify that cost, I think. Now, this bedding may give you a very small, short-term, and marginal measure of competition control here in the southeast. In the lake states in New England, it may give you an awful lot of vegetation control. And if you're in Canada or perhaps Scandinavia, again, it can give you some pretty decent competition control. But here in the southeast, it's not going to do anything for you. In no time at all, that planting mound and the areas around it are going to be overgrown with everything green. Again, in wetlands, the goal isn't so much to lower the water table, in this case, as it is to raise the planting bed. Furrows surrounding these beds can fill up with water, and I jokingly call them canoe lanes. And my PhD study site, they did this before I started my work. And they were effectively draining the wetland, because wetlands are typically in flat places, but there's still a little bit of slope and terrain in there. And you got to follow the contours if you're going to bed. Don't go against the contours. And the company whose land I was working on got in some trouble for bedding because they were draining the wetland. So you want to go with the contours to avoid draining that wetland. Back in the old days, we would go against the contours to drain it. But again, we don't want to drain these areas. Ripping or subsoiling is the use of a subsoiling plow or shank to tear through roots, pans, or clay to improve drainage and aeration. Typically, here in the southeast, we use this on areas where there's either a natural fragipan or hard pan within the top 12 to 18 inches of the soil surface, or more commonly in old ag fields where they have plowed and used, pulled a plow across it, and when continuous row crop agriculture for years and years can develop what we call a plow pan. And planting in that plow pan can be very difficult because the seedlings aren't going to do very well because they have restricted soil volume in which to grow in. What the subsoiling does is it breaks through that pan layer, increasing the effective rooting depth. And again, this is important in areas with, plow pans in old agricultural fields. In areas with poor drainage, this may actually improve drainage some as well, especially if that water is being held up by a pan layer. I've seen plow pans in old ag fields that held water and didn't drain very well anymore. They subsoiled it, and all of a sudden it's draining just fine as you break through that pan layer and the water has someplace to go. The disadvantages of subsoiling is that it's expensive. Again, anytime you take a piece of equipment out and you're driving it across the site, it's probably going to cost you at least $100 an acre just to get that equipment out there. It's not effective in wet, heavy clay soils because oftentimes that rip won't close up. It'll stay open, especially if it dries out or when it dries out. And any rain that falls just goes straight down into that crack. Any roots that grow into that crack obviously aren't going to do very well either because they're going to be exposed to the air. So planting in that rip can kill seedlings depending on the soils you're working on. Shearing, raking, and windrowing is another process that we don't use very much anymore, certainly here in the southeast anyway, and I think that's a good thing for an awful lot of reasons. Shearing is the cutting off of stumps and remaining trees. They'll put a shearing plow on the front of a large bulldozer and then push that down through the site, and it'll shear off any stumps, trees, and push all the debris off to the sides. And then those piles that it makes can either be burned or can be left to decompose. It clears a path, and again, clears out everything in its path, and creates easily recognizable planting sites. As you can well imagine, there's no debris. You're down to mineral soil. There we go. Raking on a site, this material is typically pushed into piles or into windrows. And it says typically not recommended. I can't think really of any situation where I would recommend doing this. What it does is it moves organic matter and the nutrients therein to places where your trees aren't. So naturally, as the slash material would decompose, those nutrients would go back into the soil, would be available for whatever it is you want to grow, be it trees in this case, to take up those nutrients. You move that organic matter away from your trees, those nutrients are gone. And almost always, and I would really have to say always, I've heard of stories where they didn't remove much topsoil, but I don't believe it. It removes the topsoil, and it's that topsoil which is the nutrient-rich part of the soil, which provides most of the nutrients for your planted trees. You remove the topsoil, or for every inch of topsoil you remove, you're losing 5 to 10 feet of site index, or 5 to 10 feet of height productivity over the life of your trees. And why is that? Because you're taking away the nutrients that it needs to grow. Also, by doing this, you're certainly increasing erosion potential, especially if you're on slopes. And you're driving a piece of heavy equipment over a site, and that's going to compact the soil. These piles that were raked up are often called windrows, and classically these windrows were burned. Right? Got rid of the debris, put it in one place, life was easy, right? This is a really bad idea. Typically these piles burn for more than one day because there's a mix of dry material in there, of fresh green material, a lot of topsoil and dirt thrown in there. And those piles don't burn well. They produce an awful lot of smoke, which can cause air quality hazards and actually can cause accidents on highways and things like that, which gets you or your landowner, depending on your state's laws on prescribed burning, into potentially a lot of hot water and a lot of trouble. So if you're going to go to the bother of making windrows or piles, do not burn them, just let them sit. Another method that is sometimes used, it's called disking. Just the use of disking plows. They can be pulled behind a four-wheeler, but pulled behind a tractor or a dozer to loosen up the surface soil. These things are good for making food plots, but not so much for site preparation for trees. Okay, it compacts the soil down below, increases erosion potential, and as far as competition goes, you're exposing all that mineral soil, and it's going to create you're just going to have a lot of vegetative problems with competing vegetation. I would not do this unless you're just making food plots for wildlife. Roller chopping. I haven't seen roller chopping done in years, but I like some of these pictures and they're kind of fun, so that's why I'm talking about it. Roller chopping, you have drums that are filled with water. You know, the drums are brought to the site, filled with water on the site, and then are towed behind a bulldozer. What it does is it crushes vegetation and other debris, pushing it down into the soil. Okay, the blades on the drums chop while crushing and incorporates organic matter into the soil, which is good, but also you get down a few inches into the soil and it's compacting it, which is bad. And the drums are very heavy and the blades are very sharp, and caution needs to be used in the field at all times. You don't want to end up like this fella being cut in half by it. Okay, that's about all I'm going to say about mechanical site preparation. Just remember, it's expensive, and unless you have some serious drainage or soil compaction problems, I probably wouldn't even do it just because of the sheer expense of it. Next up is chemical site preparation. And for this, I'm just talking about herbicides. You could also consider using fertilizers as a chemical site preparation method. However, here I'm just going to talk about herbicides. And these are chemicals used for removing competing vegetation, especially herbaceous weeds. Right. Why do we do herbaceous weed control? Especially during dry years, it can significantly increase the early survival of planted seedlings. If you have a normal rainfall year or even a wet rainfall year, especially in the spring, the seedlings could probably persist and survive and fight their way through the weeds. I mean, that's perfectly fine. If it's a drought year and you plant and you don't use herbaceous weed control, the grasses and all the other weeds that are out there competing with your tree seedlings are going to kill off your seedlings, and it's just not going to work out very well for you. So you increase survival, early growth, and effectively productivity over time. Again, in rank of order, the worst are the grasses, followed by vines, broadleaf weeds, and hardwoods. Okay, what does it do for you? Again, there's lots of stuff out there competing with your seedlings. In this picture, the orange are pine seedlings, and the white are all the other, or the pine roots, excuse me, and the white are all the other roots that are out there. There's an awful lot of stuff competing with your seedlings for especially water, and then next would be nutrients. The herbicides selectively kill all the other stuff, or most of the other stuff, which gives the pine roots a much better chance to survive. It's best if you can do this during site preparation, so before you plant. Okay? If you can't, you can do release treatments which can be performed in early to late spring. Meaning, your seedlings are planted, you can go out there and spray them in the spring before things start greening up. Not that it's necessarily going to kill your seedlings, but you want to get the right herbicide out there to kill the weed species you're going to have, and you want to kill it early before it gets established so it's easier to kill and you get a more thorough kill. There are a number of means of applying the herbicides. Here in the southeast, a lot of it, if you have a large enough acreage, you can have it done by air. And it's typically, I have here on here a plane. Herbicides are only done by helicopter. They can be done by the ground with a four-wheeler or a skidder, or hand applied if you prefer. And you can do a broadcast application like we see in the top picture with the helicopter, where it sprays over an entire area. Or you can do it banded, where you're just spraying over the area in which you're planting. So you'd spray a bandwidth that maybe would be 6 feet wide, and in the middle of that band is where you plant your seedlings, so they have 3 feet clear on either side of them. Just a few things to keep in mind with aerial herbicide applications, and your applicator, I'm sure, would be aware of this, but if you decide to go this route, you may want to ask you some of these questions. Ask about wind speed, how fast does the wind have to be before they won't apply, because they're concerned with drift. And drift is just, they apply the herbicide on one place, the wind blows it somewhere else, and it's killing things off-site, and that's usually a bad idea. Eventually, your neighbor's going to get upset about that. High temperatures can cause problems depending on which herbicide you use. Air inversions can be problematic with the applications. Rainfall immediately after or shortly thereafter, this is as little as 1/10 of an inch of rain after application, can remove the herbicide and effectively rendering it unavailable. And soil moisture stress also is bad. You want the herbicide to get into the ground and get into the plant roots. And if there's, soil moisture is poor and the plant roots aren't taking up water, they're not going to take up much of the herbicide either. Okay. If you're ambitious and you don't mind a little bit of work, you can do what we call hand applications or hack and squirt. I have here less than 250 stems per acre, but it's really up to you. Again, depending on how much labor you want to involve in this. The chemicals being used, the species being controlled, of course, and how hard you like to work. For about $20, you can get the deluxe model of hatchet and squirt bottle. It's important to calibrate the bottle to make sure you're applying the proper amount of chemical. Okay, so you get a plant watering bottle. You can get a decent plant watering bottle for a couple bucks at Walmart or wherever, your local feed store. You want one with an adjustable nozzle on it, and you want to adjust that nozzle so it's coming out as like a half cone. And then you get baby medicine dispensers. You can go to your local pharmacy and ask them for some. They measure out in millimeters, and you want about 1 millimeter per spray. And you want to be careful to avoid killing desirable stems. In this picture, the tree in the background with like the sun shining around it looking like a halo, that's a cherry bark oak from an East Texas bottomland hardwood. That tree was gorgeous, beautiful, high quality, high value tree. That gnarly bent up thing in front of it is a red maple. If it were me, I'd be more interested in killing that red maple than in killing off my oak tree. Now, the chemicals you use, the herbicides you use to kill the maple can also kill your oak tree, so you have to be careful when you're applying the herbicide. Right. So in summary, the goal of herbaceous weed control is to increase early survival in your plantations. You want to reduce the competition from grass, vines, broadleaf weeds, and hardwoods. It can increase the long-term growth and yield of planted trees. Your trees grow more the first year and you have more of them survive. Obviously, your per acre growth and yield is going to be a lot higher. Do it either site preparation or pre-emergent in the spring before the weeds come up. And there's a number of available chemicals. You'll notice perhaps that I haven't mentioned any chemical names in this. It's because there are, we could do a whole separate presentation just on chemical names and application rates. But those names and application rates and what's available today can change tomorrow, depending on different, what the law says and companies decide to do. So what I'd suggest is if you're interested in this, contact a professional forester in your area or your local feed store or co-op and ask them about what kind of chemicals are available. Even better, talk to your county extension office personnel as they can help you out with this as well. In costs, in general, for an aerial application of herbicide for release treatments, it costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $65 to $85 an acre. You can take that with a grain of salt. That number isn't gospel, but that'll get you in the ballpark. That's a pretty reasonable number. For what you want to do, that's pretty good, pretty good money spent. $85 an acre, you control all the weeds that are out there, give your trees a chance to survive. That could be a good investment for you. Again, there's a number of application methods that you could use from the air, from the ground. You can do it by hand. Depends on what contractors are available in your area. If there's no contractors in your area to do it by air, there's no sense in even really looking into that. Costs, it may cost different in other parts of the country, and you may be able to do it yourself and save some money. Okay. You can also do herbaceous weed control for hardwoods. You just need to be careful that you're not killing the species you want to keep. And as everything else we do in forestry, herbaceous weed control prescription should be tailored to your site. Don't do something because your neighbor did it or because a company that owns some land on the other side of the county you live in did it this way. Do what you need to do for your particular site. For injection, the keys to success: Pick the right chemical for the species, make the proper cut in the bark, and apply at the proper time of the year. Typically, that's in late summer to fall. And that may seem a little counterintuitive, but at that time of year, the trees are starting to shut down. They're sending sugars from the leaves down to the roots, and you want to get the herbicide into the roots so that it will kill the tree. Okay. Heavy rain right after application may wash out your herbicide. Droughty periods, again, may reduce effectiveness. Misapplication may kill desirable species. Again, be careful. And lastly, always follow label instructions. Okay? Always follow the label. Okay. Another application method we can use is called cut stump applications. Because if you cut down, especially if you're here in the southeast, but I've seen it up north as well, you cut down, let's say, a red maple. And what happens? You're going to have 100 of its cousins sprouting up to its funeral. So instead of having one tree, all of a sudden you got 100 trees to deal with. So we have cut stump applications that you can use to treat the stump after you cut it. Now you need to apply the proper chemical for the species in question at the proper rate and as soon as you can after cutting the tree down, certainly within an hour or so. And you want to apply the herbicide to the sapwood, and the sapwood is the very outer ring of the tree. The inner stuff, the heartwood, that's all dead. That wood is all dead. It's just used for storage. The tree puts all sorts of junk in there to store it, and it helps support the tree. The live part of the tree, of the trunk of the tree, is the very outer ring just inside of the bark. Okay? Again, rain soon after application or applying the herbicide too long after cutting down the tree will reduce its success. All right, fire for site preparation. In much of the southeast, we typically burn in late summer or early fall. That time of year, it's usually hot and dry, which allows for good removal of the slash. The slash that's out there should be good and dry by then. Typically burns pretty hot, clears the land well. Okay? Burn following herbicide spray after the vegetation is dead. A lot of site prep treatments will be applied in mid to late summer. Once everything's good and dead, you can go out and burn it and remove that vegetation to clear the site. Can be used for natural or artificial regeneration. However, finding vendors to conduct the burn could be a problem. It's becoming problematic here in the southeast, and I'd suspect in other parts of the country it'd be even more difficult. And if there are any burning laws or air quality laws in your state, be sure that you follow those laws. Because creating air quality problems, adding smoke into, say, the city of Denver in the middle of summer is probably a bad idea. Or smoking in an interstate highway, with your smoke, and you're not careful with where it goes and how you plan for your fire can be a really bad thing. So follow whatever prescribed burning and air quality laws there are in your state to help keep yourself out of trouble. Okay, in summary, we use site preparation to reduce the impact of site-limiting factors. These factors include drainage or aeration, soil compaction, competing vegetation, and debris on site. The competing vegetation is typically our #1 limiting factor here in the southeast. In other parts of the country, it may be compaction, it may be drainage, but here it's typically competing vegetation. Site preparation can be mechanical. Again, it's going to be the most expensive of the methods. Typically, mechanical operations will cost anywhere from a minimum $100 to $150 an acre on up. I know one landowner here in Mississippi that paid $400 an acre to have mechanical site preparation done on his site. And the poor guy didn't need to do all the work that he did, but he thought he did because that's what one of our local timber companies was doing. And I had to explain to him that our local timber company has a much deeper and bigger checkbook than he has. And so, make sure that whatever it is you do, you tailor it to your site. And mechanical site preparation methods are best for altering drainage or aeration and also clearing the site. Chemical operations are more moderately expensive, somewhere in the neighborhood of, I'll just say $80 or on up an acre. And it's used exclusively for controlling vegetation. You're not going to change the drainage, you're not going to change the debris on site by using chemical site preparation. Prescribed burning is the cheapest, somewhere in the neighborhood of $20, $25 an acre. You want to clear the debris off site, that's the cheapest way to do it. Okay. The method you choose should be geared to your site and not part of some sort of cookie cutter plan or because that's what some company or your neighbors do. I've seen it all. I've seen landowners do all sorts of things, and do what you need to do, but don't do what everybody else is doing just because they are. Do what you need to do for your site. And I have a rule of thumb about site preparation, and I say it's do as much as necessary but as little as possible, because it's going to cost you money. And it depends on what you want to do. Of course, it's entirely your decision to make. But I'd say do as much as you need to do, but as little as possible, just to save on costs. Now, for more information, we have lots of information available on our website, MSUcares.com. And here are a few publications. Our Mississippi Weed Control Guidelines, publication number 1532, provides information on all sorts of weeds that we want to control in Mississippi for agriculture, all the way on up into forestry and lawn use. It gives recommended herbicide rates for different species and different application methods, and that's updated annually. We have the Managing the Family Forest in Mississippi publication, of which this presentation is covering Chapter 2. That's publication 2470 on our site. And then a couple other forestry herbicide publications, Tree Injection with Reduced Labor Requirements, and Forest Herbicide Safety. There's a whole bunch more publications there. I just listed a few that I thought would be really relevant to folks given this presentation. For more information, go to MSUcares.com. And lastly, we need to be careful out in the woods because, accidents do happen. Thank you very much.